This is Arise America.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has said attempts of Western countries to exclude Russian energy suppliers will affect the world economy. During a meeting with top officials on the situation in the Russian oil and gas sector, Putin said the consequences of such a step could become quite painful. Putin added that Russian natural gas can't be replaced by alternative sources.
Attempts of Western countries to push out Russian suppliers, replace our energy resources by alternative supplies will inevitably affect all the world economy. Consequences of such a step can become quite painful, first of all, for initiators of such a policy. What is surprising here, so-called partners from unfriendly countries assume that they can avoid Russian energy resources, including natural gas. Its reasonable replacement for Europe doesn't exist. It is possible, but it doesn't exist so far. Everyone understands there is no free volume of energy resources on the world market. Banks from unfriendly countries delay transfers of payments. I will remind we set a goal to convert calculations for energy resources to national currency, progressively moving away from the dollar and the euro. All in all, we are going to increase the proportion of calculations in national currency in the system of external trade.
Well, for more on the Ukraine war, let's cross now live to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Rise US Correspondent Eric Ham. Eric, good to see you as always. Now, I understand more details have been released regarding the extra $800 million that the US has pledged to Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right, Dan. The $800 million that President Biden actually has said that he would provide to the Ukrainians. What we are now learning is that $800 million is going to go to a number of different military installations, including, of course, not only just the tanks that we talked about, but also it's going to go to what are called counter-artillery radars, switchblade tactical drones. Of course, that's something that was seen as very popular, and then a number of military personnel believed would be very helpful. 30,000 sets of body armor and helmet, over 2,000 optics and laser rangefinders, explosives and demolition equipment, and of course, Claymore mines. And we know that's something that Russia has been using quite a bit of in this war throughout Ukraine. In addition to that, we know that they're also sending tactical artillery radar systems, as well as M113 armored personnel carriers. So quite a bit of material here. There's also chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear protective equipment. Now, of course, we know that there has been this concern that Russia may have used chemical weapons. In Mariupol, there's a concern that they may use additional chemical weapons. And as this war begins to pick up in the Donbass region. And so what we're seeing here is the United States is equipping them with the necessary materials that they need to be able to combat against that. Of course, we still don't know if this is in fact a red line for the United States or NATO, but we do know that right now the United States is prepared to help Ukraine if in fact Russia decides to use chemical weapons in this war. And now there's a growing concern that Vladimir Putin may actually use tactical nuclear weapons in this war. So clearly what we're seeing here is there's an escalation that we have been told it's actually coming. We don't know when it will happen. We do know that Russia is preparing for a massive offensive in the east. And also, too, there's growing concern that the United States, or can the United States get this next round of military aid to Ukraine as it prepares for this next offensive that many believe will be certainly far more deadlier than anything that we have seen before, as we now know that Russia has named this new general who is overseeing the war in Ukraine, and he is known for his brutality based on the evidence that we have seen in other places, including Syria.
About the escalation, I mean, Finland and Sweden say that they're considering joining NATO, and Russia have reacted by warning, as you say, about nuclear weapons. Now we're hearing that President Biden is thinking and considering sending senior officials to Ukraine. I mean, could that action cause basically the Russians to escalate the invasion to a new level. They'll say that the terms have changed and that American boots, even if it's just officials, are on the ground in Ukraine.
Well, it certainly could, of course. But in fact, this was a question that was posed to President Biden today before he boarded Air Force One on his trip to Greensboro, North Carolina. And he was asked pointedly, if in fact the United States would be sending U.S. officials to Ukraine, and who would those officials be? The president said that that was still something that was being taken under advisement, and that they still had not made a decision on who would actually be going, if anyone at all would be going to Ukraine. So we're still waiting to get more detailed information from the White House about what officials, or if this would be military boots on the ground. Remember, the president has been adamant that the United States would not have U.S. military boots on the ground in Ukraine. And so we don't know if he's veering from that statement. But what we do know is that now that they're looking at this, the question becomes, what has changed that now the United States believes that they need to actually send people to Ukraine. So these are questions that we're still waiting to get answers from the administration as to what that will look like. And also, if this is something that the United States would be doing in collaboration with its NATO partners as well.
Now, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, has said that the US will concentrate on the evasion of implementing Russian sanctions. I mean, what does he mean? Is he targeting Russians trying to get around it, or other countries trying to get around sanctions?
It's actually both. We do know that the United States has made clear that they are actually looking at at both Russians as well as others who may be attempting to help Russia get around the sanctions. Already, the Treasury Department has sanctioned a number of entities that have attempted to try to get around these sanctions. And also, we just learned recently that there were $14 billion in Western banks that were actually seized that belong to Russians. And of course, we know that just recently a number of oligarchs have had additional yachts and things like that seized as well. And so what we're seeing take place right now is the United States, as well as Western allies, are continuing to ramp up their efforts to squeeze Russia economically to make this war more difficult. But again, Dan, this all comes back to Russia still has many cards to be able to play. And one reason for that is because we know that they are getting more than $1 billion per day from Russian energy and oil assets that are being paid out by European countries. And so that is enough to be able to help Putin fund this war. Already there's a bit of a split in Europe over cutting back on these resources. But right now, we're just not seeing a unified front from either NATO or European allies to actually make the decision to actually end their dependence on Russian oil or cut them off. And so that is still going to be a resource that will allow Vladimir Putin to continue to be able to fund this war. This is a question that we have put to the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, a number of times, as well as to the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. When is this actually going to come into play? But right now, there's still no unified decision by Europe to actually move on this. And it appears as though, based on our discussions with the White House, they are not prepared to actually push Europe any further on this.
Well, it's interesting because the New York Times has reported in the last couple of hours that France is considering, or Europe is considering, banning Russian oil, but they won't make an announcement till after the French election in case of it may affect the result. I mean, is it dangerous now when you know President Biden and President Zelensky have been talking about possible further sanctions, and there is no time as far as President Zelensky is concerned? He wants action straight away. That they're thinking about opinion polls in one of Europe's top economic countries.
Well, look, we know, and we've done our own reporting on this. The White House is watching these elections very closely, and depending on what happens with the outcome of these elections, it could certainly have an impact on what takes place with this between Russia and Ukraine, because as we know, Le Pen is seen as someone who is not only a Putin sympathizer, but someone who wants to see France out of NATO, in fact, out of the European Union. And so there's growing concern. And clearly, what we're seeing here in Washington is the White House is attempting to navigate that because, again, what President Biden wants is to be able to speak with one voice. And that's what they're doing right now, attempting to try to placate all key allies and partners.
Well, Eric, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for your analysis this evening. Eric Hammer, US Correspondent in Washington.
This is Arise America.